Thanks for taking the time to join me on this presentation. I'm Andy Hemmings of TIA-Link Limited, and I'm going to give you an overview of 2LSC, Lean Single Link Supply Chain, which is a process for implementing a cross-enterprise supply chain strategy based upon lean principles and supply chain best practice. There are 12 slides to view, which altogether take 13 minutes. Briefly, the agenda. We'll look at what lean supply chain is, its definition, typical supply chain costs, current options in implementation, the limitations, and importantly, the 5 blockers that prevent take-up on a bigger scale. Then we'll look at 2LSC, the concept, how it's different to other processes, the benefits, and the diagnostic, which is key to how 2LSC overcomes the 5 blockers. Then finally, an overview of the transformation process itself. There are a number of definitions about, all similar in message, but with slightly different wording. This one is by APICS, the American Production and Inventory Control Society, but in essence, it's the collaborative end-to-end optimization of the supply chain by application of supply chain best practice and the extension of lean principles across corporate boundaries, which all sound well and good, but where's the benefit? Money is always a good place to start, and just to give you a flavour of typical supply chain costs, this example is from a company that I've worked in. The annual operating costs were £36 million, of which nearly £2 million was spent on the supply chain. What is interesting is that when comparing this with other businesses, whilst the financial costs change, the split in terms of percentage breakdown doesn't move about that much, and you find that the supply chain accounts for somewhere in the order of 12 to 15% of the labour and overhead costs, and around 5 to 8% of the total operating costs. But once you add in the material spend, you're always upwards of 60% of the total operating cost going into the supply chain in one form or another. Add to this the most obvious hidden cost of cash tied up in inventory, which in this case was nearly £3 million, and you can see there's a significant opportunity just from making a small percentage saving. That's not to say that the benefits are restricted to cost alone. It could be, for example, levelling supply, reducing cumulative lead time, or improving delivery performance. There's plenty of scope. So how best to exploit this opportunity? There's a variety of publications and approaches about it. I'm not going to go into the detail of them here, other than to say they all have certain features in common. They are product or system specific, at operational level, and focus on the mechanics of the transactions. So if you decide to incorporate other systems, you need to repeat the exercise. They are after the event, which means that you are up against changing systems that are already designed with problems embedded. And they don't focus on the supply chain policies or strategy of partner companies. Consequently, they do not fundamentally change the way the partners work together going forward, nor do they strengthen the supply chain for the longer term so that it can more readily react to changing situations. Companies still basically operate in isolation. Nevertheless, there are clearly significant benefits to be gained, so you have to ask the question, why do we not see uptake on a much wider scale? To answer this, we need to look at the bigger picture. Whether it's to implement lean across a single system or a range of products, you're going to face some or all of the 5 blockers. The first and obvious issue is the complexity of the systems themselves. Supply chains, whilst often portrayed as structured tiered pyramids, are in reality complex networks. This requires the collective knowledge of all partners in order to identify the root cause of problematic functions, which leads us into the next blocker, independence. Independence and protecting self-interest will always raise suspicion over any customer-led or joint program, as they can easily be misinterpreted as a veiled cost-down activity and threat to profits. This doesn't exactly encourage the openness and collaboration required to unravel the aforementioned complexity. The third blocker is uncertainty. Lack of visibility, both up and downstream, will often prompt supply chain managers to put in safety, usually in the form of stock, over and above that required to accommodate normal variation either in their manufacturing processes or customer demand. Supplier reliability is also a big factor, particularly if there's history. Local inefficiency is the fourth blocker. When you optimize a system, you're looking for the best overall output, which may result in some elements performing below their maximum efficiency, and the supply chain is no different. This can conflict against internal performance measures as well as customer purchasing policies if the focus is on cost down alone and in isolation of end-to-end benefit. Finally, measures. Most businesses will have KPIs typically reported on quality, cost and delivery, but the formats and units of measure will vary from business to business depending on their operating practices. So there's a reluctance to take up end-to-end measures needed to drive system performance, such as system inventory in days or amplification or cumulative lead time, which brings us on to 2LSC. The concept of 2LSC, rather than focusing on the mechanics of transactions, is aimed at overcoming the blockers and creating the environment to enable supply chain transformation without the need to individually analyse every system. There are three cornerstones, the first of which is a cross-enterprise supply chain vision and supporting strategy that both creates and sustains an integrated supply chain. This is based on lean principles and supply chain best practice. The second is collaborative improvement aimed at achieving common goals that are aligned to customer future state objectives. This refocuses vertical thinking within corporate silos to horizontal thinking within systems that include the final customer. The third is jointly developed standards and measures that span the supply chain and drive system performance so that the supply chains ultimately function as an entity or single link. So it is a fundamental long-term and permanent shift in the way that the supply chains operate. As for the benefits of this approach, they can be best described in terms of their impact on the customer, partner companies and products. For the customer, it's the strategy alignment of key supply chains with their own business objectives, as well as stronger supply chains formed through shared knowledge and understanding that are better capable of responding to unforeseen situations. For partners, it is common objectives with no hidden agendas. This overcomes the mistrust of joint activities, which then enables aligned and coordinated improvement. The elimination of disconnects between adjoining supply chains can bring competitive advantage, whilst the demonstrated ability to work with other companies as partners can present marketing opportunities as well as enhance customer perception. For existing products, it's the elimination of hidden costs and NVA that are typically washed into the overheads of cost accounting, inventory and decanting being typical examples, and generic issues, once identified and resolved, can lead to rapid improvement across a range of systems by application of compatible solutions. For new products, because the right thinking and systems are in place, NVA is prevented up front, whilst new product launch can benefit if there is common understanding and partner collaboration to help absorb the impact of issues that affect material supply. The 2LSC process itself uses a series of diagnostics to assess how current practice within a supply chain compares to the 2LSC concept both at company level and collectively. It examines 5 key attributes that are fundamental to transformation, each of which is broken down into 3 separate elements. As well as being an assessment tool, the diagnostic provides partner companies with a structured framework to work within that includes end objectives for each of the 15 elements. A standard scoring process enables partners to measure themselves both individually as well as collectively from end to end and understand where each other's strengths lie, providing an information sharing platform from which other partners can learn. The first of the 5 attributes is supply chain integration. In order to achieve optimum performance, the supply chain needs to function as an entity having common goals. Supply chain strategy establishes whether there's a vision supported by an integrated strategy aligned to customer objectives. Business improvement examines whether processes are simply internal and reactive through to whether they are objective-driven, collaborative and measured by system KPIs, whilst the cross-enterprise teams element measures overall joint participation in all functions. Lean implementation is the second diagnostic. As one of the main transformation drivers, both its acceptance and application are examined separately, as is value adding and waste, which requires end-to-end process understanding by all the supply chain partners if it is to be fully exposed. Demand management looks at how the signal is transmitted through the supply chain, as this determines what is built to customer demand, schedule or forecast, which in turn impacts on inventory. Demand analysis and operations planning are closely linked and require joint coordination if quantity and lead time requirements of the customer are to be met. The fourth attribute is production planning and inventory management. The objective here is to minimize disruption to flow through standardization and common planning processes, as well as minimization of order multiple. Inventory management practice avoids safety stock overkill through visibility of systems inventory and strategically positioning buffers at the most effective point. Finally, standardization. In data, it improves flow and eliminates conversion error. In product and components, it reduces cost, inventory and lead times. And in design, it increases speed of development. It's the level of interaction and collaboration in each that is examined. Implementation is a 4-phase process which commences with analysis at the lead site that examines existing products, spend and supply relationships using the diagnostic. The output identifies product groups and issues, strategic and core suppliers, and how the company interfaces with its business partners. This enables selection of a pilot stream that is representative of the problems that need to be addressed and where both the impact of change as well as probability of successful execution are high. Planning brings the supply chain partners on board with the concept and objectives, and effectively the program is launched with the formation of the first cross-enterprise team. The outputs, which include a combined system diagnostic, will identify how partner interface impacts on pilot system performance, as well as the potential gains that can be delivered by a positive diagnostic shift. Objectives and collaborative tactics will determine who is doing what, where and when in order to effect gap closure in the diagnostic, as well as the KPIs used to measure system performance. Running the pilot implements the actions identified from the planning phase that are needed to deliver the future state, and having achieved the diagnostic shift, the review establishes how well the projected gains have been delivered, as well as any other benefits. The rollout is the point at which the vision will become crystallized and the strategy will follow from the lessons learned in the pilot study. The first step will be realization of gains in other streams, where generic issues can be addressed through similar actions taken during the pilot study. Longer term, plans and breakthroughs will need setting, but as said earlier, this is a fundamental and long-term shift in the way the supply chains operate. Finally, the takeaway. This is about a transition from supply chains functioning within corporate silos, working to internal KPIs, where the costs of disconnected systems are either absorbed by the supply chain partners or passed on to the customer, to cross-enterprise flow, where overall systems performance is the driver and joined-up thinking eliminates waste and its consequential costs. This is achieved through cross-enterprise vision and strategy, collaborative improvement, and using standards and measures that span the supply chain. Thanks for your time, and I hope you found it of interest. If you want any further information, you can contact me via LinkedIn, email me, or call me directly. Thanks once again for listening.